to Fertile Talks, the global podcast celebrating the diversity of fertility journeys. I'm your host, Dr. Yemi Famuyiwa. Whether you're just starting or simply curious, this is your safe space. In each episode, we will bring you expert insights, heartfelt personal stories, and the latest in reproductive health. Our goal is to break down barriers, tackle stigma, and provide support and hope. So whether you're in the Americas, Africa, or Asia, Fertile Talks is your companion on the path to parenthood. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to Fertile Talks. What is egg freezing? So what most people don't realize is that women, unlike men, are born with a fixed number of eggs. As a matter of fact, the most eggs a woman will ever have is when she's in her mother's womb at around 20 weeks of pregnancy. At that time, you can use the rule of twos. So roughly you will have about 20 million eggs. But those eggs, they don't keep dividing, unlike sperm. As a matter of fact, they keep dying off. So by the time a woman is born, you actually have about 200,000 eggs left. That's a rapid decline, isn't it? Now, these eggs go through a process of division so that they can, you split one to make two, but the division in an egg is frozen. And that freezing stays in place till a woman hits menarche, which is when she starts her menstrual cycle. So you resume division, your menstrual cycle, we call it the HPO axis, the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis kicks in, you start having a menstrual cycle. Now, what happens is, even though everybody kind of knows that we ovulate one egg at a time, what most people don't know is that the ovary is constantly churning over your eggs. So you get a wave of development from tiny follicles where the eggs are housed. And when they get to about 8 or 9 millimeters, they fall off unless they're picked up by the brain. And that activity kind of comes in waves. So a lot has been elucidated over the years. Now, what happens is the brain actually selects a few with a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone, which coming from the brain stimulates the ovary and picks up, if you will, a bunch of eggs, not just one. That bunch of egg now starts to grow, out of which one becomes the dominant follicle that ovulates. The rest in that basket dies off. So you see there are two places where the eggs are dying off, right? So when you pick up a bunch of them, one will ovulate, the rest of the bunch will die off. But throughout the entire month, you still have some that are in the lower part constantly going through a wave of dying off. So by the time we hit around age 50, for some women, it may be sooner. You're done, you're out. Basket completely empty. So your ovaries are depleted. So in addition to constantly losing the numbers, these eggs are getting older and they're getting harder to fertilize them. So when you get closer to an age of 40, for instance, the ability to fertilize the eggs and get good embryos starts to really fall off. And no magician can wave that back, by the way. Okay, so there is an age where you have the most, not the most really, but the healthiest number of eggs before you start that rapid decline, right? So usually we say before age 35, but really starts a little bit around 32. And then steps up by 37, nosedives at 40, and then it goes on down. So you get to a point where you no longer have as many, and the ones you have are no longer as competent. So that when you fertilize this older, incompetent eggs, your chance of getting a genetic accident goes up. Now, the simplest way to think about it, and this is really, really simple. Imagine, if you will, if you have an egg, right? You have the DNA. It's lined up along the axis of the nucleus, and it's held down by telomeres, by little chains that tether it at both ends of the nucleus, right? This DNA is waiting to be fertilized with sperm DNA that comes along and sort of lines up, so chromosome 1 to chromosome 1, 2 to, and so on and so forth. But if the eggs are starting, the telomeres holding the DNA start to fracture with age. So instead of lining up properly, you might get, a stagger, if you will, right? That's a simple way to look at it. So the embryo that results, instead of getting two full complements of chromosome, can start missing some or have an extra one here. We call those aneuploid, or I like to think of them as genetic accidents. Most genetic accident embryos will not even implant. And if they do, they may miscarry. Very rarely they do develop, and you get severe birth defects. Very few chromosomal anomalies can survive. The ones that do survive, the ones you see the most, are Down syndrome, who will make it. But even the vast majority of Down syndrome infants actually get spontaneously aborted. And the incidence of aneuploidy, the incidence of the genetic accidents, starts around 30, 32 for someone in their 30s, 32-year-old. You go up to about 41-ish, 45% by age 35, 37. By age 40 and above, this incident goes up to about 82%. So when women come to see me at age 44, for instance, you have to be careful and let them know there's a high risk that they may have, out of 10 embryos, 8 may be abnormal. Now, 2 may be normal. So you can actually go figure out which one is abnormal genetically and which one is not. And you can help the patient by only implanting the normal ones, okay? Because the abnormal ones will not fertilize, and it won't implant. It leads to heartbreak, it leads to depression, it leads to treatment fatigue, where people are going, doc, why me? Why is it not happening? So there is a timeline, if you will, when you can optimize getting good eggs and getting a lot of them. And that's what egg freezing does. Now, another thing that egg freezing does is, we all know that if you do IVF, like I explained to you, you fertilize an egg, you get an embryo. In the past, before we could test which ones are normal or not, you may end up with a lot of embryos that you may frankly not implant. Let's say you have 10 embryos. We're not going to implant 10 embryos in your tummy, right? So you'll end up with embryos that you won't use. So one of the benefits of egg freezing is, why don't you freeze the eggs and only thaw that which you will use? So you can choose to say, okay, I have 15 eggs. I'm only going to thaw and fertilize 2, because that's all I'm going to put back in. So I'm not creating more embryos than I need. Another place we freeze eggs is, we get a lot of cancer patients that are about to start chemotherapy. So I'll get a call saying, oh, so-and-so starting chemotherapy in 4 weeks. Well, we run into high gear and try to stimulate their ovaries and get as many eggs as we can possibly salvage and save for them, so that they can go through chemotherapy. And then when they have fully recovered from their cancer, they can come back and use their eggs, or they can have a surrogate carry it for them. Okay, so that's a brief introduction of what goes on in your ovary. Now let me click next here. Why is it not going? Oh, okay, fine. How do we get these eggs? Well, you don't just go into, I had a picture here, I don't have it anymore. Let me see. You don't just go in and pluck the eggs, because the eggs are not lying in a mature stage. You actually have to mature the eggs before you can collect them. That process is called ovarian stimulation. There are different protocols that you can use to achieve this. But typically when you get started, it takes about 10 plus or minus 1 or 2 days to completely stimulate the ovaries. And during that time, you're actually monitoring the ovary, monitoring the growth, and seeing how big the follicles are. And when the follicles are big enough, then you surmise that the egg contained within it must be mature enough. And you can now go under anesthesia, collect these eggs. Now, the thing with eggs is, unlike sperm, they can't hang out forever. So when we collect the eggs, we usually try to freeze them almost within the first hour to 2 hours. What are the chances of you coming back to use your eggs and that the eggs will give a live birth? Well, believe it or not, there is a high fall-off rate. You actually need a lot of eggs. You need close to 10 to 20 mature, not immature, not the degenerated ones. You need 10 to 20 mature eggs in order to assure 90% live birth. If you're 35 years old when you froze your eggs. I mean, you can come back and use your eggs when you're 45, hopefully not 50, but you can use it any time. But the ability of those eggs to produce a live birth depends on the quality of the eggs, the maturity of the eggs, and how many you have. So the older you are, the less effective you are. So as a matter of fact, if you're 42 and telling me, oh, I want to freeze my eggs at age 42, I'll probably tell you, I don't think that's a good idea, right? You may have waited too late. What is the workup that you need? Well, we usually check your hormones around the second or fourth day of your menstrual cycle. We also do something like do we do an ultrasound and look at the ovaries and actually count how many small follicles can we see? Those are the antral follicles that I told you are constantly churning through the ovary. The more of them you can see at any one time, the more you are most likely to collect eggs. So we call that the ovarian reserve, if you will. And those same follicles also produce a hormone called anti-Mullerian hormone, right? So you can have your anti-Mullerian hormone checked. If it's low, then that gives you pause that you may be running out of eggs. And if it's high, then you probably have a ton left, right? You got time on your hand, right? So I already talked about it takes about 10 days to stimulate. We collect the eggs using sort of like, the one you might do with sedation dentistry. But in my case, I prefer to use a board-certified anesthesiologist because I don't want to worry about how comfortable the patient is while I'm focused on collecting the eggs, right? I want to focus on what I'm doing and do that best and let somebody who's good at sedating the patient, making sure they're comfortable, making sure they're safe, and let them take care of that. And then there's a process of recovery. They usually recover, usually very fast because we're freezing the eggs, we're not putting embryos back. So patients really bounce back real fast. Thank you for tuning in to Fertile Talks. We hope today's episode has provided you with valuable insights and support for your fertility journey. Remember, you are not alone. Now, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please simply leave us a comment. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe with a friend. Your ratings, your shares, and your reviews are greatly appreciated and is going to help us serve more of our listening audience. Thank you once again. This is Dr. Famiyiwa.